Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Culture Chat. In this episode, Greg and I discuss a myriad of topics. We are celebrating our 10th week in a row of podcasts. I am both thrilled and grateful to be on this journey with him. We celebrate the huge wins from the Supreme Court's decisions to allow DACA to remain and the LGBTQ workers' protection from discrimination. Given the state of the world right now, we are celebrating. I love hearing Greg talk about his writing process. He shares his methods for writing action sequences as well as using anger to write. We discuss his novel Walking Dead, which tackles sex trafficking around the world, including the U.S. Greg also shares a few words about his dear friend and mentor, Denny O'Neil, who recently passed away. For those that don't already know, Greg Rucka is a New York Times bestselling author of hundreds of comics and nearly 24 novels. He has written for film, television, and video games. His career has included critically acclaimed and Eisner-winning work in both creator-owned and work-for-hire arenas. As always, please listen with an open mind and remember that my opinion on politics are my own and do not affect my position at work. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please share and rate my podcast on your platform of choice. Finally, if you would like to support with a donation, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com. I appreciate it. For comments or suggestions, please email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at sifumimichan. Now, on with the show. I was unfortunately having some internet issues during the beginning part of this interview, and so you will not hear me greet Greg and say hello, but I think you might know what that sounds like. However, his wedding anniversary is coming up, his, I believe, 28th wedding anniversary, and I asked about his proposal. So Greg was in the middle of sharing his proposal story when it cut back in, so if it's a little abrupt, I apologize.
Yeah, and when we finally realized that this was a thing, we had so poisoned the well around everybody else that we ended up keeping it secret for several months. And then she graduated, and I was still at school. And before she had graduated, and it was because I remember it was like a February day or whatnot. So she would have been a senior, I would have been a junior. We were, I believe, walking to the comic book store, and we were having a conversation, and I don't remember the details of it. Um, and we were just, we were just talking and so on. And I said, something, 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 so after we get married, something, something, something. And I realized, 10 feet later that she had stopped. And she's looking at me and she's like, "Did you just propose?" And I was like, "No, I mean, I just, no, that wasn't a proposal. That was just us. That's just common sense. I just figured the way things were going."
Right, right.
So she was like, okay. So then what happened was, the following year, when I graduated, she came up for the graduation because she was working in Manhattan. She was living in Greenwich Village with a friend of hers who had graduated the year before,
Right.
I believe. And so we had the graduation ceremony. We went out to dinner with my family and all that. We got back to campus and I took her for a walk, and there was a particular bench, and I had her sit down, and I got down on her knee and asked her to marry me with a ring and everything.
Wow, so official.
Well, I mean, I was a sappy romantic then. Um, I think I'm just sappy now.
Yeah, but I see the romance coming out through your work, though. I see the
I think it's
themes.
it's it's funny. There's this weird thing that's sort of happened. This weird. We're getting Black Magic 12 is going to be coming out very
Oh,
soon,
okay.
and the issue's gonna have to be locked and go to the printer next week. And I was looking over, and Nick drew this months and months and months ago, right, off of a script that I had written months and months and months ago, and I had sort of forgotten. Um, and one of the things that's happening in issue 12 is we've jumped to May, so it's Beltane, and in the tradition, that is a big spring rite, and it being a big spring rite, there's a lot of sex.
Okay.
And I had forgotten just how much sex there is in this arc, and what Nick is drawing, and it was like, wow. Like, holy mackerel, there's a lot of naked people running around in this issue. And I it hit me that I was like, this seems to be going on in a lot of my work right now. I don't know what's going on in my head, that there's sort of this this convergence of all these stories where people are getting it on. So yeah, make of that what you will.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any follow-up questions about
yeah, I'm not sure either. Issue 12.
All right, issue 12, everybody, on Stand Soon.
Blackmail, that's right. Blackmail. Wow, that was my brain went into a Monty Python riff there for no reason. But yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. It's there in the story for a reason. Things have evolved and so on. And some people are having very meaningful, loving relationships that are manifesting affection in a physical fashion. And we will leave it at that.
Very good. Well, I have this feeling, though, because, I, of course, love a lot of your books that have action. And I'll have a side note on that later from Oscar finished Walking Dead.
Yeah, it's funny. Given all the things we've talked about, your triggers, I think Walking is going to be a real hard book for you.
Yeah, Oscar told me I shouldn't. He said, I'm just going to tell you about it. So he just told me about it because it's different to just say, oh, here's what it's about versus like kind of living that. And so, but he was pretty upset that I'm technically not going to really read it with him because I think this one's has been his favorite so far.
I think it's probably the best of the Kodiaks.
Yeah. He loved it. Like, loved it. I mean, first of all, obviously there's a lot of action, and he's like,
Atticus. I at a point in the novel, and it's before it's done, Atticus actually totals up how many people he's killed thus far, and he's already into double digits.
Yes.
I mean, he's literally like, wow, I've killed 10 people just to get here. It's a dark ride. I mean, it's about slavery. It's about human trafficking, and part of that trafficking is sexual slavery, but the book touches on industrial and labor slavery. In particular, is not kind to the UAE. He ends up in Dubai as part of the journey he's on. Going back, we just jumped off the whole thing. I'm glad he liked it. I do think it is the best of the Kodiaks. Nowhere in the book is there an actual description.
Right. No, he said it's not
but
graphic.
Atticus can't lie about what's happening.
Right. I think
he can't say they took this 14-year-old girl and they were very nice to her.
Right. Yeah, they gave her popcorn and let her watch cartoons all day. Yeah. No, I think it's more of because I did say, okay, I could read things that kind of have a hint of things, but I think it's because the whole theme of it is the entire book. It would bring up feelings and not great ones for me. But he really loved this book.
It's very spoiler-ish.
Yeah.
To say this, but I would ask Oscar when we are off channel, if he feels the ending is redemptive and hopeful at all.
Okay. Yeah. I will
Is
definitely
that
ask him. He's dying to talk to you about Walking Dead.
yeah.
I mean, he finished it in like a day or two. He said he started it and then suddenly he goes, I'm almost finished. I'm like, what have you been doing? He's just been, he was living and breathing it. And he again said, yeah, this is definitively like of the same genre and caliber of Lee Child books and all that. And, so he was really, really, really into it and loved it. But I remember we had talked before that you usually write and then there's something that's often going on at that time that brings you to those issues. So I was trying to remember, like in 2009, what was going on at that time? Was there
It was not a political thing.
Okay.
It was, hold on a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to get it. Just
All right.
fill the air, say something.
Oh, yeah.
So what had happened was I think I had been listening to NPR back in the days when NPR had not lost its spine pretty much entirely. I was listening to Terry Gross, and she was interviewing a journalist named Ben Skinner, Benjamin Skinner, about a book he had written called A Crime So Monstrous, Face to Face with Modern Day Slavery.
Ah, okay.
And here, for you and me, because
for
we have
us,
video, nobody else does, this is my copy of it, and you can still see
the tabs and
the
marks,
tabs and my notes. And I read it. I forced myself to read it twice. Once reading it, and then once reading it, taking notes with a highlighter. And when I say forced, I mean that it is an excruciatingly painful read, and it ain't because of the prose, it's because of the subject matter. Skinner, and there's no way you can be exhaustive on the subject, but Skinner chased the story, and he chased it around the world, and it was I had been aware, but I hadn't been aware. And it is one of those things where, I set the book down and I couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about the fact that I write out of anger a lot of the time, and I was just incandescent that this wasn't front page news every day, everywhere. And I think in the afterword of Walking Dead, I say, I very clearly give Skinner the credit. I'm like, this book is a result of this. But I go on to say in the afterword, none of the scenarios presented in the novel are fabricated from whole cloth.
Yeah.
Situations are dramatized and narratively, but none of the actual construct of the situation and the way it works, I didn't make that up.
Right. Unfortunately.
This is the thing. And it was one of the, in sort of the general thesis of Greg's later stage career work, it was sort of the final, it intersects with Lazarus in an interesting way, because it was sort of the final brick in the edifice that argued that at the end of the day, it's only ever about money. It doesn't matter for the people with power. It doesn't matter about political ideology. The number of people who actually say, no, I do this because I genuinely believe this, compared to the people who go, I am willing to do anything to make a buck.
Yeah.
The ratio is skewed heavily towards the people who want to make a buck. And, one of the things that Skinner documents is that, people who would normally, for every other cultural, religious, ethnic, whatever reason, be pointing guns at each other, are happy to set them down if they can sell slaves to each other. Like the pipeline quite literally requires people of radically different political ideologies to be dealing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And to do so cheerfully because there's so much money to be made selling human beings. And it was, it was disgusting. It was enraging. And then Skinner, reading the Skinner led me to other books and led me to a lot of research. Jen is fond of saying that that's the novel that broke me.
I see.
That and I reference it in the acknowledgments. I talk about, for once again, being there when I went into the dark places and having the light on when I came back. But I don't think I've recovered. I mean, there are things you can't unknow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I
Uh,
know how well researched you are when you
yeah.
write all your characters. Having been able to have the privilege of reading some of the short stories on your characters that you don't even publish, just so that you can write the novels. And
Well,
so the fact that, yeah,
The Petra story for Bravo was actually published. It was up on the Mulholland site, and I
oh,
think I
okay,
put it
okay,
up on my website as well. So
yeah.
it is, for the four people who actually went out there and looked for it, they could find it.
But I
Um,
feel like you do that anyway for your characters. Like
yeah.
you go through so many steps. So I'm glad that that one's available for people because it's so great. And and that's the thing, the fact that you had to do such a deep dive into this type of subject matter in order to then have this full story. It, I'm sure, took a lot out of you. I mean,
I carried it for a really long time,
yeah.
and I'm still carrying it, I think. And this is not a woe is me. It's just, that like I said, there are things that you can't unknow, and you can try to ignore them if you are of that inclination, but they're still gonna find you. And the Black Lives Matter is another perfect example of
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yep.
One of the things going on right now is that, I'm sure there are lots of people who are desperate to ignore it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but there are a lot more people, I think, who perhaps for the first time are being confronted with a truth that they had either tacitly ignored or been prevented from seeing. I mean, one of the problems with systemic racism is that it hides its racism if you are one of the beneficiaries of the system,
Yes, yes.
right?
And yeah, there's so many things you touched on there because you had said earlier, like, how is this, sex trafficking, all this stuff going on, not on the front page? And why do we not hear about it more? And,
Yeah.
now that, of course, this Black Lives Matter, like, everything's exploded, which has been positive. But even amongst that, there were the lynching that you didn't
Yeah, no,
really see or hear about, and
and
quote unquote
still going
suicides, and it's still
on.
going on. And
Yeah,
oh gosh, Oscar, obviously this whole thing has brought up so many discussions with my husband and friends and whatnot, but then he read your book and I go, gosh, this is just such a dark side of humanity, this slavery, this instinct or this greed, like you say, for one to think that they have control over another's actual human life, right?
mhm.
And that it is not a second thought. And a lot of the sex trafficking and everything happens in a lot of countries, but it happens here, and
Oh
people
yes,
aren't aware. But I think they remove themselves from it
yeah,
because, oh well, that's what's going over in Southeast Asia, out of
yeah.
sight, out of
It's
mind.
it's
It's
somewhere
it's
else.
somewhere
It's
else. I mean, they
not
can't
in.
help it. It's so poor there.
Yeah.
It's not a quote
Look,
unquote problem that's right in their face. And now that
I'm
things
what.
are being thrown in people's faces, there's a
Yeah, they have to
discomfort. I'm
confront.
uncomfortable now, right?
Well, and one of the things that I, again, very deliberately in Walking Dead, right? It picks up with Atticus and Elena living, on the coast of the Black Sea in the Republic of Georgia, and it takes place I think it's set about 3 years after Patriot Acts. They've been there a while.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts in, one of the former Soviet satellites. It starts in Georgia. And Atticus, in the course of the story, goes from Georgia to Turkey, to Dubai, back to Georgia, to Ukraine, to Amsterdam, to New York, to and the chain he's following more significantly, because the New York stop isn't on that chain, but the chain literally goes Republic of Georgia, Turkey, UAE, Amsterdam, Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, the last act of the book takes place in the U.S. So one of the things that I was very and it was very conscious. It was not. It was not. It was not an attempt to. It was an attempt to address the conceit of American exceptionalism, and say no.
Right. See, that's what I was trying to say earlier.
Yeah, you can talk about all the places that we know. We've heard about. Oh, this happens in Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
This happens in Thailand. Guess what? It's happening in your backyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's happening in your backyard.
And that's so typical of so many issues and social justice issues that I think that we as Americans put blinders on, even hunger, even just the quote unquote normal, unfortunately, issues. But a couple things. One is, I've told you before that now when I read your prose specifically, I told you I hear like hints of Greg, and I wonder, is it because I talk to you every week and I feel like I know you now? But I feel like Oscar listens to our conversations, and he said the same thing, because there was a line in the book that was like, oh, I'm picking this type of gun. Was it a shotgun because it worked for Cheney or something? And I was like, oh my God, I could hear Greg saying that.
Yeah, there is a line where he says it was good enough for Dick Cheney.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that.
I'm actually very fond of it. If I remember correctly, I'm fond of that chapter because it's an authorial moment.
Okay.
One of the things that happens, especially when I'm writing these action sequences, right, is that they really I have to block them, right? Because you can't just sit there. You have to see the space. Mm-hmm. And then you're trying to figure out what are the plausible moves and counter moves. How do you use this space that you are creating? And sometimes I'll draw maps, and sometimes I'll use action figures.
Well, I was going to ask you, because you have, some background and you have knowledge, but I've talked to other authors that have no concept and they still do a really good job. So I was like, how do you do that? Because it's a spatial thing. As someone who does, kung fu choreography, I'm going, because he told me, he goes, the action's fantastic.
It is. It is very deliberately done, and then I have resources that I can go to and say, like, this situation, what would you do, and things like that. But that chapter in particular, the one with that Dick Cheney reference, is Atticus walking into this environment and knowing it was going to go bad. And I think when I had started the sequence, I was like, it's going to move this way, and then he's going to have to turn the tables. And I think I was writing it, and I realized, oh, no, he's just going to, as soon as he's through the door, he's just going to open up on him. Like, for the first time in the series, he is not reactive. He is just like, right, I know how this is going to go. I think I need to beat the fuck out of everybody in this room now. And so it was a different sequence, because all of a sudden,
and offensive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he goes entirely full offense, mm-hmm. in a way that was different. Like, there are sequences in Walking Dead, especially near the end, where he's going to do a thing and he knows he's going to do it a certain way, and he mm-hmm. does it. It's in this one, it was him basically going, oh, I'm taking the initiative from you. And I am. And the thing about it is, normally it's him having planned these things very carefully.
Yeah.
I will do this. I will do this. I will do this. And he was just like, nope, stop, nope, just nope, not doing it this time. This time we're getting up straight off the bat.
Yeah. Okay. So earlier you had just mentioned, yeah, sometimes I map it out and draw it. And sometimes I have action figures. All I could picture is that scene from Spaceballs where Dark Helmet is playing with the dolls and Colonel Sanders comes in. He's like, knock first, knock. And he's like, did you see anything? He's like, no, sir, I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. So I just see like Jen going, Greg, what are you doing? You're like, nothing.
I mean, it allows the action figures to be a write-off.
Yeah, you're like, I need these.
But it's funny because it literally is me moving things around and being like, so what are the distances, and trying to figure out what's plausible
for time and everything. Yeah, that's fascinating.
If somebody throws a hand grenade in your direction, how can you possibly survive it? And I let Atticus off fairly easily, and I think the reason readers accept it is he does everything else correctly. So since he does everything else correctly, you can kind of go, well, it must have been a very small hand grenade. Yeah. Which is as silly as it sounds. Yeah. So
I love it. No, that was super fascinating actually, because it does, especially when you read something where for you a lot of the stuff's very, very tactical, military, and kind of real life. But then, I've read books where it's very fantasy and I'm like, wow, they really have to go out there with the whole flying and all these different things when it's a huge fight scene. I go, how do you map that in your head? Because for me, everything's very physical based. So I find it fascinating you're able to put it into words. But we were talking earlier too about the lack of information, because us as I don't want to categorize Americans, I'd even say humans don't want to take the effort to go and find out the information. So if it's not right there in front of us, it's not in our face. And I did want to mention, like, since there's very few, the two big wins that we recently got, something I'm really passionate about, which is today, the news just released for the DACA is not going to be rescinded. And I had a lovely young DACA student on my show, and I sent her an email immediately. And then, of course, the LGBT rights. Yeah. And so I have to celebrate that, because there's so few things to celebrate that we want to celebrate those things.
I will take the stopgap wins right now. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting that the court is not, there are a whole bunch of evangelical types who have willfully ignoring the fact that Trump is absolutely, they claim to detest. But they were willing to ride that train because they thought they would get what they wanted from him. And now they haven't. And the backlash on that's going to be something to see. That and the stuff that's coming out about the Bolton book, and it's
I know, right? We already know, but
yeah, it's like none of this was news, guys.
Yeah.
Look, here we are, on the 18th of June as we're recording this, and this is 3 weeks now of protests. Voices are still being raised.
Yep.
The fight is still continuing. Anybody who thinks that this is going to go away, I think, is in the same way that they were hoping COVID would. It's not.
Yeah, well, Florida is definitely not helping that situation. So apologies again to everyone, on behalf of Florida.
I read Arizona is just crazy, and Oregon is spiking again. I mean, it's just, So look, take the hope where you can. We're in for a rough summer.
Yeah. That's why I did want to mention, because you and I tend to go dark a lot. And so I was like, I think we should take a few minutes to at least celebrate that, because it was
I
actually a
would prefer not
surprise.
going dark today.
Okay. Let's stay light.
Yeah,
I
we
know.
talked about human
Yeah,
trafficking.
but in a good way. Yeah, it was tied
Uh,
into story development, and yeah,
I,
but ironically, it wasn't as dark as we normally go, even though we started with human trafficking.
no, look, I'm jumping back to Walking Dead again, and I'm delighted. I really am delighted Oscar liked that, and I really do wish it was a book you could read because
Yes, I know, I know.
I think
Maybe
think
he could just highlight the action sequences, and I'll just read
it,
those.
it is it you know it is the most well, again, I'm not ashamed of this. There is a final sequence. The book ends a certain way. There's sort of an epilogue follow up, but there's a final action sequence, and in it, it was a sequence that was not only one of those ones where it's like, what's the space and use the action figures sort of thing. It was also a sequence that I wanted to end a certain way, like I had to generate the motion of it so I could get a certain result at the end.
Okay.
And in a book that is about human trafficking and and related to that, in particular about the exploitation of women.
Yeah.
It is a very feminist declaration action at the end. Like Atticus's last line, I think, in the book is the women can take care of themselves. And that was, like I say, it is, it can't really be redemptive, but it is meant to be hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. How long did that one take you to write?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, see, that's actually a really trick question for me. I can't speak for other novelists. There's another Kodiak story bouncing around in my head, right? And I've been thinking about it for a good 18 months now. So, but I haven't been thinking about it every day all the time.
Right.
So do I count that?
Right. I was going to say, do you count like the time that Andy was in your head walking around for years to when you wrote it for Old Guard, or do you count? Yeah, I guess you could count that as research time, because people asked me about my documentary. Like, how long did that take? I was like, 15 years.
Yeah, my life.
Right, my whole life. But the actual technical act of doing the editing, the shooting, whatever, like that's usually the answer I kind of give. But at film festivals, I had the same thing. Well, what do you count? So I guess people are usually curious about the writing part of it versus, okay, I had the concept of, and it's been kind of ruminating in my head, but I guess the act of writing part.
So the mechanical act of the writing.
There you go. Yeah.
Once everything is in theory ready to now just do the typing part, I can knock out a draft start to finish in about 30 to 60 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But that's because when I am writing a novel, I will sit down, and that is almost the only thing I am doing, right? Which is one of the other reasons, incidentally, that novel output drops so much, is that if that's the only thing I'm doing, I can't be doing my comics.
Your comics, yeah.
And it is a marathon, so you can't be like, I'm going to run this far, and then I'm going to stop and sprint this thing, and then run. For me, it's like once your head is in the novel, it's got to stay pretty much in the novel. And so novel discipline, and I haven't written my own. I've done work for hire, like the Star Wars stuff and so on, since Bravo. But writing something like Bravo or the Kodiaks or QNC, it's you wake up, you have your coffee, you do whatever, and then you sit down. And for me, it was, and you shoot for 3,000 words a day.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's the benchmark. It's I am trying to get X amount written per day, and on a particularly productive day, I might hit 5,000. And invariably at the beginning, it's a ramp up. Like, I want to do 3,000 today. I did 250, words, not 250,000. And then the next day, and maybe the next day I'll hit 1,000 words, and maybe the next day I'll hit 2,000. And you have to sort of break down the wall into the book.
Yeah.
But once I'm there, one of the pleasures is that, and it's one of the few pleasures I've found in novel writing, is that once you're underway, you almost definitionally know what the next thing has to be.
Okay.
Right? So you always know what you're writing towards. And that is crucial when you hit those dark days of the 35 to 60,000, 65,000 word stretch, which is sort of the heart of the book, because you can't see where you started and you can't see where you're going, and you just have to keep doing it. So the draft process, I can, dedicated, I can knock out a draft in 2 months. Then the revision process is any amount of time as demanded by editorial and also by my own satisfaction with the draft. Because one of the reasons I'm writing 3,000 words a day is I'm trying to get the draft out as fast as possible. I'm not trying to make it good. I'm just trying to get it out.
Yeah.
Because once it's out, I can then go back and try to make it good. And note the crucial word in that sentence was try.
Yeah, it's very similar to Kung Fu, actually. Or any discipline, really, right?
Yeah.
Any discipline, it's the same. You get the basic, and then you improve, and hopefully, eventually, you don't suck. That's kind of what I tell my students.
And that's pretty much where I start everything. I start everything at, well, I suck. Let's see how much boulder rolling it's going to take to achieve not suck so much. And then maybe even not suck.
Right. One day.
Yeah.
One of the things I don't know why, enjoy in a book is actually the little dedication at the beginning where it's like, this is for so-and-so. And I don't know if anyone else feels that way, because I feel like it's really just for the author and that person, but then it's public recognition. So I always kind of want to ask the authors, like, well, who is that person and why is this and whatnot. I know you've done, I think Bravo was your manager. Was it for, I think it was Angela.
Was it Angela?
I think so.
Yeah.
And then you just mentioned that, I'm not sure for Walking Dead, but I always find that really interesting. So is it normally...
I can find out. Hold on.
And for you, I mean, is it normally because of that book you're particularly working on, or how does that... I was so curious about it. I looked up before, how did this begin? How did this dedication thing begin? And I guess it started back in the day. It says classical antiquity, before authors were actually paid to put their recognition in. Someone would be like, hey, I'm a patron, so put my name at the beginning. So it kind of started off like that, but now it's a much more endearing and kind of I would say an honor, right? So how do you choose who that is?
It's always meant to be an act of it is an acknowledgement. It's a thank you.
Yeah.
I cannot figure out how. I've got the book on Kindle, and I cannot figure out how to get to page 1 on it. You would think this would be easier to use. Let's see what happens if I hit go to. No, that's not where I want to go. All right, never mind. A lot of the time, I mean, it's indeterminate. In some of these books, it's a genuine thank you for letting me abuse you emotionally as a support network and intellectually and so on through the arduous process of creating this thing. And I want to say thank you. And sometimes it's a grander gesture. I've got the No Man's Land novel right here. And my memory is that I dedicated that one to my mom. Yeah, it's to Corinna Joan Rucka, my mother who taught me to read. and to Denny O'Neil, the master who inspired me to write.
Wow.
And so on, on some of these books it's friends, on some of these books it's family. Um, I rarely dedicate a book to somebody I don't know. And I more often because and then the acknowledge. See, you look at the dedication. I look at the acknowledgments.
Mm-hmm.
When I read something, I always go to the
Oh yeah,
acknowledgments.
that's where it's a little bit lengthier. Yes,
And
yes.
it's
Like,
interesting because it's an insight into the process.
yes, yes.
It tells you something about how the
Yeah,
book
I
came
enjoy
about,
that as well. Hmm.
and it tells you about the relationships on it,
Right, but
right?
that's why I have
So,
the curiosity about the dedication because you don't know. It's unless
mhm,
it's obvious. Like your mom's name probably could have figured that one out as some sort of relationship.
right,
But you even put why in that dedication specifically.
yeah,
A lot of time it's just like for Angela or for so
yeah,
and so, and you're like, what does that mean? So that's why the
yeah,
acknowledgments are kind of
and,
cool because you get to
and
kind of
so
have a little more insight.
yeah. Sometimes it's meant to be a little under the table.
Yeah, and I love
There's
that.
there's a very I don't know if it's critical space. I think it's critical space that is dedicated, and I know that part of that dedication is to Nunzio Andrew, who was there when Elena was born. Um, and that's like one of my best friends in the world who I've known since college,
Yeah,
and who literally was in the room as the concept of this woman came into existence.
I see.
And in that, certainly can claim some small amount of parentage.
Hmm.
Um, it's weird. The dedication is oddly performative
Hmm.
versus, I think, the acknowledgments, um, which are far less so.
Okay.
Uh, because there's nothing that says you have to get an acknowledgement, right?
Right, right. No, no, no,
Uh,
no. Yeah. Yeah.
but I guarantee you that should I write a book where I am going to need, um, that I'm going to need details on kung fu usage, and I were to go to you and or Oscar, right?
Which
I
you
would,
better at this point.
right, but it would be implicit in that there would at some point be a conversation where I said, "Would you guys like an acknowledgement?"
Okay.
And at the end of because the acknowledgment's always the very last thing I write,
Right,
right?
right, right. Yeah, well,
Like
the whole thing's done, and then you
exactly,
think about all
manuscript's
this.
finished.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I actually tend to reach out to the people who I'm looking to acknowledge,
Oh, you do? Okay.
and will say, "Would you want an acknowledgement?" Because sometimes, and especially Walking Dead was an example of this. Shooting at Midnight was an example of this. I talked to people who did not want their names used.
Oh, okay. So there's some
Uh,
people that are like, no, no, no.
yeah, they were quite
Anonymous
literally
is good.
like,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. See,
Or
I wouldn't have thought of it that way. I'm like, oh, you should surprise people. But now I
yeah,
realize surprises are sometimes
yeah.
not so good.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
a friend in the State Department actually asked me not to give him
Of
an
course, right.
acknowledgement
Yeah,
at
I guess
one
that would make
point.
sense.
I had somebody at NSA once be like, "No, no, please don't." I had
Mm-hmm.
somebody at DEA do the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and you absolutely respect that. You're like, okay, no
Yeah. Oh,
problem.
yeah. Of course. But
You know,
but I'm sure even you reaching out and then saying that you would have liked to that's the thank you enough. I
yeah.
mean, it's a really nice gesture and
Well, and then
yeah,
I also tend to send copies to everybody who
yeah, yeah.
help, right?
Yes, yes.
I don't then go, oh no, you've gotta now go buy it. It'll be like, no, no, you're in the acknowledgments. Here's a copy for you with a great big thank you.
Yes, yes, of course.
So
And so, well, I mean, I know that you talked a lot about Denny on another show, so I want to link that. But of course, you just mentioned that he was
yeah,
literally in that
yeah,
other
he was
book,
the
and so as an inspiration, just in closing, kind of like just that appreciation, right, for those that have
yeah. So
been so important to us.
We lost Denny. This will go out on the 25th. Um, we lost Denny on the 12th, or the announcement of his passing was on the 12th of June.
Mm-hmm.
He was 81. For people who do not know who Denny O'Neil was, He was a remarkable writer and a remarkable editor, and he was a writer of comics and prose, and an editor of both. But he is known most primarily for his stewardship, really, arguably his stewardship of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
He was the Batman group editor in the late '90s and into the early aughts, and under him, you got the Batman that when people think of Batman, they think of Denny's
Mm-hmm.
umbrella.
Right.
They don't think of Batman in, it was Denny who moved him into noir.
Yeah.
And it was Denny. You don't get, for instance, Batman Year One by Miller without Denny.
Yeah.
Denny's editorial leadership and his guidance was invaluable. He was the man responsible for sort of the reinvention of the question in the DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
He had taken this character that had been lying pretty fallow and sort of turned him from a libertarian mouthpiece as created by Steve Ditko into an actual character, and used the series in particular to interrogate, I think, not just some really interesting philosophical questions, but also some broader societal ones that I still think to this day people don't fully pick up on.
Yeah.
He was a social activist. He was liberal as all get out, but he had that wonderful capacity to, and it's something that I can't do. And it may be that the world was a world that allowed for it, but political ideology, he never demanded you agreed with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And he never kept you out if you didn't. He was very inclusive. But we look, and there are stumbles in his career. There's a very infamous, run on Wonder Woman where he depowered her and had her being sort of a Diana Riggish street level vigilante.
Mm-hmm.
And in later years would say that was, it was a horrible mistake. I shouldn't have done it. I took, this feminist icon and I depowered her. And I thought I was doing it for the right reasons. I didn't think it through, right? I didn't see the optics on it. And he was remarkable in that. So many people, especially writers, especially artists in the grand umbrella of artistry, don't own their missteps. They don't acknowledge their mistakes. And Denny was perpetually a student. He was never afraid to say, no, I got that wrong, or I didn't understand that, or otherwise. And and on a personal level, we don't have an Old Guard movie coming out on the 10th of July, on Netflix. If Denny O'Neil hadn't asked me, one day in '99, okay, kid, see if you can write me a story, and I went home and, wrote a little comic about Renee Montoya and Two-Face, and all of a sudden I'm writing Batman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is a direct line from Oni Press and Whiteout to this introduction. One can argue the introduction would have been made without having worked at Oni, because what got me in the door at DC, what literally got me in the door to meet with Denny, was he had read my first novel and had liked it, mm-hmm. and was aware there was a second novel and knew I was in town and was willing to meet me for lunch.
I see.
So it's working for Denny that lets me into DC, and it's letting me into DC that leads to everything that I do for DC.
Yeah.
It leads to Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman
and Wonder Woman. Yeah. So and he was he was a remarkably gentle man. He was a gentle man,
Mm-hmm.
and he had his own demons, and he struggled with them throughout his life. But he was just a huge heart.
Yeah.
So
Well, he'll certainly be missed. And obviously, though, have left a legacy of art and creation with us, and also impacted so many people like yourself that continues that on. So
oh yeah,
I think that's a positive thing, of course. And something you said earlier about him apologizing and being able to kind of look at oneself and their work, and I think us as humans can all be better at that as well. And acknowledging that people can change their mind and apologize, and accepting that. So it's
and
one thing
learn.
and learning.
And,
Yeah.
and that's the part of the apology, right?
Right.
That's I'm your apology.
Yeah, not just saying you're sorry.
Right. Your apology means nothing if you're just going to go out there and kick me again.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
If the apology is, I am very sorry I kicked you, Greg. Implicit in that is, and I will not be doing it again.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where the proof is, right? One can look at behaviors and say, I mean, and this is why there is a way to apologize. And people do not see, and a vast majority of people who offer apologies don't seem to get it, right?
Well, it's obviously a press statement. That's it, right? That's all you have to do. Okay.
Well, and it's also passive, right?
Right.
I absolve myself of responsibility. I am sorry you took it the wrong way, right? It's like, no, that's not an apology.
Right.
The apology is, I am sorry I did this thing, right? And then you can say, this is how it happened. This is why it happened. This is what I will endeavor to do to not repeat it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To make right and to make better. It's that crucial combination that people don't seem to get.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So, well, we are all learning and hopefully moving in the correct direction, which is forward. I know I am learning anyway every week from you. So I thank you for that. So in the next coming weeks, listeners, I want you to keep sending me your suggestions, because Greg and I are going to tackle some book to film adaptations. And we did have a bunch of interesting suggestions. Yes. And books. Like, we're going to do a little book club action. So Greg and I are going to pick something and decide on that.
I was going to say, you're going to give them a reading list and say, this week.
Yeah, maybe.
We're going to give you 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we won't ask them to read Walking Dead because you would have to.
Well, I could just swap out and let Oscar talk about it all day with you. But we had some really interesting suggestions already for our book film adaptation. So they range everywhere from Pride and Prejudice to The Thin Red Line.
Wow.
I know. I was like, I can never watch that film again. So we'll end that one there. But Lord of the Rings came up, Jurassic Park, Hunt for Red October. So we have a lot of things to discuss, you and I. But listeners, send us more suggestions, and then we will do our little, Greg and Mimi chat about it. So until next time, listeners, we will be signing off till next week, I hope.
Yeah, keep being hopeful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg.
It's good talking to you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.